So the starting point's a soil test, hugely important that you, for me, not testing your soil's like driving down the highway with a blindfold on. How the hell do you know what you're doing? It's just guesswork unless you've sort of had a look and got some idea of what that means. And we're going to spend some time later today going through a soil test and explaining the basic concepts so you can understand. Look, it's the most important single determinant of your growing success is understanding. You don't go to people with vested. There's no other business. Give me an example of any business on the planet where you go to people for vested interests and say, what do you reckon I should do? I mean, you don't get really crook and go to an undertaker and say, what do you think I should? I mean, that's been really cynical, but realistically, there's no business where you get all your advice from rural stores or even us, because we sell stuff. You need to understand the dynamics of what determines your profitability, and that's how your soil works. And you're going to learn that in much, much more depth as we move through. So good soil test is really important. See, when I talked about minerals, this is really worth printing out, laminating and putting it on your wall in your office. This is Professor Mulder from 39 years back, who antagonism is the solid line. If it goes from a solid line with an arrow pointing to this mineral here, for example, high zinc shuts down iron, for example. And you can see this relationship with high iron. Red soils are high iron. It's iron oxide, the red colour. Iron will shut down phosphate. You can see that arrow antagonising the uptake of high phosphorus, because you put on a heap of chicken manure, will shut down iron. So that's antagonism. There's also some minerals that stimulate other minerals, and calcium is hugely important in this context because it does both stimulation and antagonism, and that's why we want to get it right. It's the Goldilocks mineral that we want to get our calcium right first of everything. There's nothing more important than calcium and getting your calcium right. Why? Because if you haven't got it right, calcium directly stimulates the uptake of manganese, of potash. There's no other mineral that does seven things: manganese, potash, iron, phosphate, boron, zinc, and magnesium, all stimulated by having enough calcium in the soil. That's huge. The huge players, they're in plant nutrition and resilience and productivity, governed by having calcium there that pushes those minerals into the plant. But if you don't understand how your soil test works and you go to the rural store and they say, well, you've got a pH of 5.5 in this light sandy soil in this region, and I reckon you should put 4 tonnes of lime on there, and that soil can hold 1.5 tonnes, that's worse than not liming. Because if you put too much calcium, calcium does the opposite. It shuts down, see the antagonism, the same 7 minerals that it otherwise stimulates, because you put too much on, more than what the soil was appropriate. Every soil, depending on how much clay that holds on to the positively charged mineral calcium. Of course, sand's got bugger all clay, so you need small doses of calcium on a sandy soil. And if you don't understand that, you're going to shoot yourself in both feet and start on your knees. So be aware of that. This is a real handy thing, and this is just antagonism. This is my Dutch agronomy team that developed this based on my teaching. But again, you could print this out and put it on your wall. Understand that everything in this quartile affects everything else in this quartile. So if you have high magnesium, which is very common in a lot of soils in Australia, then it can affect calcium uptake, it can affect potassium, it can affect ammonium, nitrogen. High sodium, which is very common in West Australia, in fact, in various soils around the country, can affect any of these. And you don't know which one's affecting because it depends on the soil type and how much organic matter that can buffer some of that effect. You don't know unless you do a leaf test, just what's been affected and what you can counter. That's why you've got to do a tissue test at least before flowering. The business end of the season, do a tissue test. What do you want, plant? Oh, now I understand. And take care of that. It's not rocket science. You can see here, you don't want to overdo gypsum in a heavy soil because high sulfur will shut down phosphorus. That's a big price. It will shut down nitrate, nitrogen as well. That's a big price to pay. Red soil's notorious because they shut down manganese and zinc. So everything affects everything in that quartile. Any one of these things will affect the others. Not guaranteed, because there's other things that can counter that, including the percentage of organic matter, but highly likely. So it's another good thing to put on your wall to get an idea. And this is really important. This is just pH. And, I strongly believe in the importance of a vegetable garden. I think it's the most important single wellness tool for yourself and your family. Who's got a vegetable garden? Oh, well done. That's an unusually high number. Wonderfully important thing. It's not just about you growing the food with a bunch of compost and nutrients and so forth, and producing this nutrient-dense food, hopefully with more medicinal qualities and hopefully with less chemicals, because ideally you can grow with chemical-free and should be in a veggie garden. But it's also the simple factor of being able to eat that food fresh, and people don't realise how important that is. You know, you take a snow pea overnight, 12 hours, you lost 50% of the vitamin C in that snow pea, which is quite a high source of vitamin C. There's this tremendous loss of nutrition associated with how long it sits on the shelf. And many of that stuff was picked, you know, they picked bananas green and then ripen them. Tomatoes are half green when they're picked. The shelf life that sat around for a long time before you eat it. And if you've got a veggie garden, you've got champagne food. You eat it, you know, if you're going to have your salad, you pick enough salad for that night, not for the next 3 nights, and then give it to your chooks or whatever afterwards. But just that's what you can do with a veggie garden. You can't, it's so important. It's insanely important. But what we see is that people don't understand, if they're growing this ultimate wellness tool called the veggie garden, how important soil pH is in that equation. So if we look at the story here, just so you understand that the amount of nutrition that's going into that plant is directly determined by something as simple as the pH of the soil. And so we see here this 4 to 10 pH range here, and the width of that bar is how much of that nutrient's going into the food for your medicinal qualities for yourself and your family. And we see very commonly people come in because we do free pH tests in the shop associated with Nutricheck down in the industrial estate in Yandina. And people come and say, oh, can you test some basic pH tests of the soil? And they're down here somewhere. And this is because they didn't do their liming. They didn't do their calcium, you know, which of course, calcium sometimes in the sandy soils down there, it can be magnesium and calcium. They need some dolomite, but it can be either or both. But if you're here, look what you're missing. I mean, this is phosphorus, this is calcium for your bone density for your children, so important in the first 8 years. It determines their lifetime bone density. Well, you're not doing too good, you know, your wonderful food. Magnesium, as important as calcium for bone density. And all of them are lacking at a pH of 5 and 5.5, and we see that all the time. But you might be up on the downs and you might have high magnesium, high sodium, you've got an alkaline soil. Well, you got what you got. It's harder to pull. This is easy to manage. It still costs you some money to fix the calcium and magnesium and bring the pH to the ideal. And the ideal is here. That's where all bars are fattest. That's where most nutrition will go into your food. And you'll have the greatest response in that soil with a pH of 6.4 right there. 6.4 is, and it's interesting because we'll talk to you later about how you can use a new tool called a sap pH meter. Squeeze a little bit of juice out of the plant and you're measuring the pH of the sap, and we find that a pH of 6.4 in the sap will be a plant that will not have disease. Now, I've never, ever, and I've walked fields for many years in many countries, I've never seen a crop at 6.4 with a disease. So how important is that finding? It is Nobel Prize winning, that finding. We'll talk about how and why that works a little later. You can test your urine first thing in the morning with a little pH strip, and I think we've got some for sale here, the pH strips, because you can also use them on the farm, and we'll teach how that works. But 6.4 is where you need to be healthy, where the healthy cow, dairy cow, 6.4 first thing in the morning is the pH. It's interesting. It's the soil, it's the plant, it's the animal. 6.4 is the sweet spot. But you've got an alkaline soil, so you can't, it's harder to change that. There are some ways you can pull it back slightly. We'll talk about when we get there. But if you're here, 8.5, and there's a lot of soils on the downs that are at that scale with high magnesium and high sodium, both of which lift pH. Well, basically the 5 trace minerals, iron, manganese, boron, copper, and zinc are affected. And so what you do is just make up a blend. I teach you how to do it for nothing, you know. It's like a kilo of each of those things. You make up a liquid of the 5 minerals and you spray it once or twice. You put some fulvic acid with it to chelate it and increase its uptake. You made your own chelated trace mineral bilirubin, and people say, oh my God, look at the change. Well, it's not rocket science. You're not uptaking those things, so put them in through the leaf and address them. And you're going to see a huge change. So they're simple concepts that all I see when I'm lecturing soil scientists, they're just nodding their heads. Oh my God, it's simple, and they didn't think of it. You know, this is simple stuff. You got this thing, so you address it. pH story of bringing it down, there's a couple of stories in there. One of them is you can use elemental sulfur if you need sulfur. So elemental sulfur is very acidifying and we'll pull it down slightly. But the other one is that it's driven by magnesium most commonly, often sodium's in there as well. And basically the story is if you can remove that magnesium, and you can do that by either putting calcium in, which displaces magnesium, or using gypsum, which is calcium sulfate, it breaks apart in the soil, grabs hold of magnesium, forms magnesium sulfate, and that's the most leachable form of magnesium. And that's why they call gypsum the clay breaker, because it does the same thing with sodium. It removes sodium and magnesium from the soil. Now, the interesting thing from a pH perspective, magnesium has 1.4 times the effect on pH that calcium has. So you can actually lime and lower pH, and people say it's impossible. You can if you've got on a high magnesium soil, because you displace something that has more impact on pH. And you can lower pH by half a point, like 8.5 can become 8, by just correcting that cal-mag ratio. And the story is when you put calcium on when it's needed, only if it's needed, then it pushes, there's a displacement effect that it pushes off the magnesium off the clay colloid. Really unique relationship between those two minerals, the only two that do that. Basically talking about some of the critical terms, when you break a mineral down to its smallest size, it's called a cation, it's called an ion, and a positively charged mineral is called a cation, which means it's got positive charges on it, and a negatively charged mineral is called an anion. And this is important to understand because this is how minerals interrelate together, because cations are positively drawn like a nail to a magnet, and you never find phosphate with 3 negatives by itself. Phosphate is tied to something else, often calcium with 2 positives. And so you form insoluble calcium phosphate. That's the downside with the concept of solubilizing DAP and MAP, is that they tie up very quickly when you put them back in the soil. So we see here, first thing to understand is that there's the concept of major and minor cations. And you think, oh, these are the important ones because they're major and these are less important, and that's not the case. Major is quantitative, which means there's just more of them involved. Calcium's in every cell wall, calcium's everywhere. So these are major minerals. Potassium's the second most abundant mineral in the plant. So these are major in terms of how much is in the plant. These are spark plugs. Trace minerals are triggering catalysts. They're like a spark plug. Tiny amounts needed, but if they're not there, you're not going to have that thing happen. If you look at something like zinc, for example, amongst many things that zinc does, it produces, there's a hormone plants make called auxins, and auxins govern leaf size. And if you're zinc deficient, because you can't make auxins without zinc, you're going to have a smaller leaf. Well, the leaf is the solar panel. The solar panel that governs everything. How much sugar you're making to feed everything is about how big that solar panel is. So a zinc deficiency will mean a smaller leaf and less production, always, not sometimes. So you make sure you're not zinc deficient. So it can be as important as a nitrogen deficiency if you're seriously deficient in zinc, because you will really suffer from a yield perspective in that situation. And that's a lot of broadacre soils need zinc. So that's major and minor. And see, it's not just that they've got positive or negative charges. They've got 1, 2, or 3 positive charges, or 1, 2, or 3 negative charges. And we mentioned the problem with phosphate. Phosphate naturally is rock phosphate. What's that? Calcium phosphate. Calcium with 2 positives joined to 3 negatives and forming this insoluble rock phosphate. And we say, oh, we're going to change that. We're going to put phosphoric acid or sulfuric acid, which is super or DAP, and we're going to break the bond between calcium and phosphate, and we're going to make water-soluble phosphate. How cool is that? We don't have to cut around all that calcium and trace minerals. Much cheaper. But we didn't change the nature of the beast. And what we know is that DAP and MAP and single super, you get 27%, and that's all of what you invested. That's kind of a rip-off. The industry acknowledges that. Some say less than 20%, and a red soil it's less than 20%, because red soil's iron with 3 positives, and that just grabs and ties up calcium really, really quickly. You get 27%, and the rest of it becomes this frozen reserve of tied up phosphate, calcium phosphate, or see there's other minerals that it joins to. In an acid soil where aluminium becomes more available, then you form aluminium phosphate. Manganese phosphate is very common, but you've tied it up. And what we suggest in a soil test, you don't have to do it every year, but you do a totals test. You say, okay, what have I got on reserve here? Because there's a whole bunch of tricks you can use to release those frozen reserves and reduce your costs. But you need to know what you got. So you do one little test once every few years. What are my totals? What are my reserves in the soil? And that's what you can then release as you're trying to grow that crop. So minerals, microbes, and humus is what the whole story is about. We'll talk about very specific strategies, and we find that if you can get 4 minerals at high levels on a leaf test, you do really, really well and you have very few problems. We'll talk about ratios on a soil test when we get there. Nitrogen abuse, as we mentioned, is the most abundant mineral in the plant. We mentioned it being 310 times more thickening and 80% of it coming from agriculture. We've actually shown that it's not just the nitrous oxide. We've shown that by radioactively tagging nitrogen, we've shown that for every kilogram of applied nitrogen that you need, that you've applied over and above what the plant needs at that time, you burn 100 kilograms of carbon from your soil that ends up in the atmosphere. So the biggest single link to losing, going from 5% down to 1.5% and having a lion's share of what was in the soil and the atmosphere, thickening the bank, trapping the heat and changing the world, is mismanagement of nitrogen. It's that important because many, many times we put more than what the plant needs. I mean, a little seed, as an intact plant's got everything it needs. You can give it little trick-alongs to get a better germination and a better little kickstart, but putting a whole pile of nitrogen under that tiny little plant is a perfect example of giving much more than, and for every kilogram that you apply at that point, over and above what the plant needs, you burn the carbon from your soil and put it up there. It's a really simple thing to be aware of, and that's proven. There's peer-reviewed papers that have demonstrated that process. We also know that nitrates are a carcinogen. It's part of the reason you don't want to be eating hydroponic food. Nitrates are taken up with water always, and if you've overdone nitrogen, which so many of us do, you don't want to underdo it either, incidentally, but if we've overdone it, then the water that is uptaken with dilutes that plant and basically creates a calling card for insects. Now, what's that about? Well, I'll digress again for a second. There's a guy called Professor Phil Callahan, who's a wonderful guy. He's got 212 published papers and 22 books published in multiple languages, 6 degrees, 6 doctorate degrees. So you can think outside the box a bit when you've got a few different degrees. He wrote a book called Tuning into Nature, which was kind of a famous landmark book where he basically described what insects are there and what they're doing. And it's kind of a penny dropping experience for many people to understand this stuff. Why have we got these little sapsuckers and insects that are destroying our crops and so forth? And what he showed was that the feelers on insects are not feelers at all. The feelers on insects are incredibly intensive and complicated antennae, and you can see it. We show photos of it. Massive antennae, all different, but they're all obvious antennae that pick up certain signs and things like pheromones. Who can I mate with? And you pick it up with the antenna. Oh, yeah, that's my time. But more importantly, he discovered that plants emit an infrared radiation, a measurable infrared radiation. The healthy, well-balanced plant sends a steady flow of infrared radiation, which we now measure with drones to know where we're going to have pest pressure. And an unbalanced plant, either something you neglected nutritionally or you put a whole heap of nitrate, what diluted everything, the unbalanced plant sends it, and the insect flying over says, yes, that's me. And then he comes to perform his role in the scheme of things. What is he? He's a garbage collector. He's there to take out the garbage and improve the overall gene pool. And the message, the penny dropping message, oh, so if I don't produce garbage, I won't have insect pressure. Yes, that's exactly what it means. And you can go online and have a look at fields in the midst of a locust plague where everything's decimated and there's one field with no damage at all. That's the high bricks field. We'll talk about bricks. That's the high nutrient dense field with the insects. You know, that's not my role, and flew over. That's a hell of an important thing to understand. I'll give you an example of how it works. I used to break up my 5-day course into mineral management, plant management, pest management, human health management, and plant management. And the pest management was all on one day. And I used to have neighbours on this little acreage I lived on before I had the farms. And this elderly couple loved veggie garden. And I put down a bore deep because I knew there were going to be droughts in the sandy soil. You could get water at 30 feet, and most of them went 40 feet. And then as soon as it got dry, they ran out of water. So I had 3 neighbours and I let them use my bore because, you know, you've got these little 5-acre or 3-acre blocks and you've got your gardens and orchards and they all get into trouble if you haven't got water. So I let them have water. And the elderly couple on one side had raised beds and they love growing veggie gardens, and they put it right next to the tap I'd put there for them. They loved growing brassicas, and they'd be out there with their dearest dust, which wasn't actually a good story. I'll talk about that if I get a chance. But and, you know, it was partially successful, but it was really handy for me because I got my raised beds doing all the stuff I do, and my broccoli and cabbages were about 17 bricks, and I could reach over and grab a leaf off theirs, and they were 4 bricks because they didn't really know how to grow stuff. And they were covered in caterpillars. So I'd take the caterpillars off their crop and put them on my 17 bricks, and I'd put a big jar filled with leaves on my 17 bricks, cabbage leaves, and their caterpillars. And by lunchtime, sitting on there while we went through that pest management day, and by lunchtime every time, and I did this 5 times in a row, every 3 months we do that course, Every time by lunchtime, all the caterpillars are dead on the bottom of the ground. How? Why are they dead? That's the model. Your only purpose in life is to reproduce. That's how nature works. Everything is about reproduction. You've got your capacity to pick where you're going. You're not going to lay your eggs on something that's going to kill your babies. And how's that working? Because you take in the high sugars, it turns into alcohol in your gut and poisons you. And that's exactly what happened when you had no food to eat but the 17 bricks. The alcohol is converted from the sugars and kills the caterpillar. And the mother's never going to lay an egg there, and she didn't lay any eggs on one for that reason. That's how that model works. It's really important to sort of understand that concept.